It's terrific to be here. What an amazing group of people you are. Thank you very much for coming, for supporting this. It's really impressive to see what's going on, and what an amazing urbanly natural place we're in. Like, this is one of the coolest places I've ever been. I was here once before when I was 10, I think, for Expo 86. Anybody remember Expo 86? It's kind of a cool thing. It looks a little bit different now, for sure. But to be here with all of you, where the ideas, the innovations can emerge, and where the drumbeat for our shared vision of people and nature thriving together grows louder. It's really terrific. I was talking to as many of you as I could in the last day or so, and I'm inspired and humbled by your stories, and by how vital nature is in each of your lives. It is the thing that binds us together, and it's really impressive to share that with each and every one of you, and to share the mission with the Children in Nature Network, so thank you for that. For me, like many of you, nature has literally shaped who I am and what I do. When I was 12 years old, I lived for summer. My first camping trip was in the Rocky Mountain National Park. It was just after the first snow, early fall, so not quite summer. I rounded the bend and came across a huge meadow filled with elk. It felt like every single elk in the entire world was in that meadow. I stood there mesmerized as they grazed and mingled, as if I were part of the herd. I was awestruck. And I share this story with you because feeling awe, even for a moment, can shake the foundation of what we believe. Awe can come from many places, but none parallels nature's ability to humble and astound. In nature, your heart flutters and your thoughts slow. My 12-year-old self, I always wanted to be connected to nature all year long, not just during the summer. Your collective work is going to make that happen for the next generation. And that's why Richard Louv's seminal book, Last Child in the Woods, resonated with me, and resonates with you, and resonates with millions of people around the world. He painted a picture of that childhood, of how far we could wander from home, of what it was like to play in a tree fort. And he brought close to home the fact that most children don't get to experience those things today. With our modern pace, experiencing awe and wonder is few and far between. When do we and our children lift our heads up from our phones and look out and pause to notice the world around us? That camping trip that was so powerful for me when I was 12 years old, well, it turns out that only 17% of kids these days get a chance to go camping. But when those kids do, 2/3 of them experience nature on a regular basis throughout their life. But the other 83% of them, only a quarter experiences nature throughout their life. That's too few. We know it. You're changing it. The movement is growing, slowly but surely. More and more children are connecting to nature, and they are experiencing the benefits that nature provides. Their conservation ethic grows. They learn a little something. They're a little bit healthier. They feel better about themselves. Their chin is lifted up higher a little bit. They feel like they can maybe lead something. All of this occurs in nature. So at the Pisces Foundation, we know that the sooner we act to support children in nature, the sooner we'll reap those benefits. The sooner we'll see more kids with the environmental know-how they will need to thrive in our rapidly changing world. With environmental know-how, we'll see smarter decisions, stronger communities, and daily actions that improve their well-being and the well-being of our planet. We believe in supporting creative innovators who know what it takes to get the job done and who are willing to do what's necessary. For Pisces, that means supporting the Children in Nature Network. This network focuses on creating, finding, and scaling solutions to connect more and more children to nature in a time when we've never needed it more than now. And not just some children, all children. Every child not only deserves to be connected, every child requires it. In order to deliver this to every child, we can no longer imagine nature only in the iconic, treasured landscapes. To give every child the opportunity to connect, we must find nature nearby. We have to reimagine where nature is. I read a New York Times opinion piece on last Sunday, titled, "Where Nature Gets Run Amok." Anybody read it? A handful. It was awesome. Here's what it said. Rob Cowan's the author. Crossing over the highway, weaving through the masses of housing and still sleeping suburbs, I sensed a rising behind the low walls and the private hedges on the outskirts of town like a great wave. That strange space beyond the streetlights, the tangled, messy border where human and nature collide and collude. Edgeland. These edgelands, or green schoolyards, or any other plot of land or water that you can find, can deliver awe and bridge all of us towards a world where people and nature can thrive together. I'm so honored to be here. It's terrific to learn from you all, to listen to the conversations that are going on. Let's build more bridges. Let's promote a greater sense of how the world values the connections that children can have in nature. It's my great pleasure this evening, or this afternoon, to introduce to you Richard Louv. This guy is terrific. Perhaps the godfather of the Children in Nature Network. He is certainly an inspiration to me, and I'm sure to many of you too. The guy's got a list of accomplishments that reads like the New York Times. And in fact, he's written in the New York Times and the London Times and countless other publications. He's written 9 books. And the last couple of them started providing real solutions for how we can connect children to nature, not just in these amazing, treasured mountain ranges or forests or desert, but right here in the cities that most of us live in. And he's espoused the virtues of connecting nature on just about every TV station possible. But perhaps my favorite part of his bio is the last sentence. He would rather hike than write. Richard Louv.
The Godfather. I give you an offer you can't refuse. Thank you, Jason. That was very kind, and thanks for your support and the Pisces Foundation and all the other supporters, sponsors here, and the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and all the people that have worked so hard to make this happen. I want to add a couple more names here before I start my sermonette. I want to acknowledge the natural leaders of the Children Nature Network. These are the young people who have truly led us into places that we would not have gone if they had not been with us in terms of our thinking. A very diverse group, led by Juan Martinez, who grew up in South Central LA, who was introduced to nature by an eco club. As some of you know, he was given a choice. He was headed for gangs, and the high school said, you can either join the eco club or you can spend your life in detention. And he thought about that choice for a while. It was a hard choice because all the nerds were in the eco club. So he did that. Then I love the story tells about how the first thing they had to do in the eco club, the teacher had them grow something. And so he'd seen his mother they'd broken up the piece of concrete outside the back door, and she planted her chili plants there in South Central LA. And so he grew a chili plant, and he took it home to his mother to show her that he could give life too. So I'd like the natural leaders to stand up, please, that are here. That's not all of them. There's more, but truly, you're our leaders. Also, I want to embarrass a couple people. There's a very famous guy here who just arrived. I just met him. He really loves this movement. And in fact, he's been working in it for at least 40 years, long before I came along or some of you. Well, I'm actually 39. No, I meant, you know what I meant. And it's Raffi, the great children's son. And we're going to hear a little bit more from Raffi at the reception. He doesn't have his guitar. Do you have your guitar with you? No, he doesn't. No. And the other person I'm going to embarrass is my good buddy, Robert Michael Pyle, who wrote The Thunder Tree, which I had the honor to write the introduction when they brought it back into print. And he's kind of the original Edgeland guy. The Thunder Tree is about the ravine behind his house, growing up in Colorado, and what he found there. And he wrote about the extinction of experience, that's his phrase, long before nature deficit disorder was coined. Robert, would you stand up and say hello? And now I'm going to really embarrass you because I'm going to plug your book. Your new book is called Through a Green Lens, 50 Years of Writing for Nature. I thought that was interesting. He told me the alternate title was going to be 50 Shades of Green. I want to talk about three things. First, I also want to say, I don't know the official name in Canada. I know in Australia it's called Welcome to Country. What is it here when the Indigenous people speak at the beginning of a conference or dance? Territorial something? I never figured that out. I think that's a wonderful ritual. And we're talking about maybe making sure we do that wherever the Children Nature Network meets. I want to talk about three things. One, about the people I get to meet and how I'm privileged to learn from them, including you. The second thing is I want to tell you about something I'm working on now that may offer an added perspective to your work, or at least I hope it does. The third is I want to express a growing sense of urgency about what's ahead of us, particularly in these times. The people I get to meet, when I wrote Last Child, I had no clue that I would spend the next decade, over a decade now, with the nicest people on earth, and they're you. And I'm serious about that. Everywhere I go, there's something about this issue that always draws the good-hearted people. And I'm privileged to be with you as often as I am. And I want to tell you right now that all of those of you who have come up to me in the hallway, and even though I acted embarrassed and sometimes ran away, who said nice things to me about the work, about the Children Nature Network. My wife has a great way of calming my nerves. I get nervous before all of these. I always worry about disappointing people. When I was about to go up to talk as a keynote speaker to the American Academy of Pediatrics, thousands of pediatricians, their national conference, I was really nervous. She took my face in her hands and she said, she's a nurse practitioner, by the way. She took my face in her hands. She said, listen to me, Rich. Pediatricians are different from other doctors. They're really nice people. So, of course, I led with that in the speech, and they liked that, and it went well. And so before I came up here, she could tell once again I was nervous. She said, listen to me, Rich. You have one job there. Your job is to listen to people about what they're doing and to be inspired by them. And I am. The people I meet, just a couple weeks ago, I was speaking at a community college, a big one, about 13,000 students, in Sacramento. And this was not a normal speech. There was going to be a student sitting with me on the stage, and we were going to have a conversation. And he was going to ask me questions. And he was 19 years old. And he wrote me an email before I got there about how this issue had changed his life. And then I got up there, and he didn't know he was going to talk about himself as much as he did, because I kept asking him questions. And here's this kid. He grew up totally in himself, cut off from other people. He would talk, but he'd rather play video games. And he had learning disabilities. He was really within himself. And then when he was 11, his legs started hurting him, just a little bit at first. And he had a rare type of bone cancer, as it turned out. My wife, Kathy, the nurse practitioner, kind of prepared me for that. She said, be prepared when you meet him that he may not have all of his limbs because of the awfulness of this particular rare cancer. And so I was pleased that he was intact, and he was a great guy. We're sitting there, and he's telling his story. I asked him to tell his story. And he said that from his knee to his hip is titanium. So something had happened. And he wasn't supposed to make it. In fact, he was given, what's the wish called? The Make-A-Wish Foundation gave him a wish. And he gave it away. So he was within himself. And when he's in the hospital, he begins to make friends with the nurses and the doctors. And he decides he wants to be a nurse. And they give him that gift. He begins to come out of his shell. And then he went into recuperation, and then he went home. And it took 2 years of recuperation. And then he read Last Child. And he learned about the Children Nature Network. He learned about you. And he said he started going out in the backyard. He couldn't go very far. He went out in the backyard. And he got to know the birds and the grass and the bush. He didn't go very far. He didn't have to. Nature was there for him. The birds were there for him. And he said it changed his life. He came fully into the world. Today, he is a student leader. He's a motivational speaker. He motivated me. A great, great guy who was filled with life. I mean, he was really on fire with being alive. I felt embarrassed because, I wasn't as on fire being alive as this kid. He was great. He was great. He did, I have to tell you this story, though, at dinner. And I met his parents, and his parents told me that story again about him. And at dinner, he looked at me, funny, for a second. He said, "How old are you?" I told him my age. I won't tell you. And he said, "How old are you?" And I told him my age. He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "You mean I look older?" He said, "Well, I had a number in mind." Thanks, buddy. So we became friends. In fact, I invited him, but he couldn't come. So I hope he comes. He's in Sacramento. I hope next year you'll meet him. But I meet these people. I meet people when I'm signing books who come up and say their kid is autistic. And they started getting their kid outdoors, and it made all the difference. I meet teachers all over the country who say to me, almost with the exact same sentence, the student who is the troublemaker in the classroom, when I get the class outdoors into a natural setting, that student becomes the leader. Not just well-behaved, the leader. So I think about all these kids sitting in the back of the class wearing black, like I am, wearing black, because I was one of those kids. The troublemakers. And what are we doing to them? Who are we losing? Who could we gain if we give them the gift of nature? I hear that sentence over and over and over again. Almost the same construction of sentence. It always surprises me. I meet people like Robert Czar, Dr. Robert Czar, who was at that American Academy of Pediatrics meeting. He went home, pediatrician. He started prescribing nature to his patients. Then he organized all the pediatricians of Washington, D.C. to start prescribing nature. And then these pediatricians worked together to create a database of all the parks in Washington, D.C. So the doctor could not only prescribe nature, but could turn to the computer and say, there's a park 1.5 blocks from your house, and here's what's there. Dr. Robert Czar is now going national with that effort. There are other doctors out there who are doing the same thing. I meet them. I meet wonderful leaders from around the world. From Brazil, I was just invited to Brazil to help launch a national campaign in Brazil to connect kids to nature. And what I learned there, which really surprised me, I'm an American, I haven't until recently traveled very much. There's a lot I don't know about the world. And I got there and I was stunned by the cities. It was in Sao Paulo and it was in Rio. These cities dwarf LA and New York City. In Brazil, I didn't know that. I thought it was all Amazon rainforest and all that. And I knew they were big cities, but I had no clue they were that big and that dense. And it reminded me of China, where I was about 1.5 years ago. And I went to 3 cities there, starting with Beijing. What happened in both of those countries was similar. In both of those countries, masses of people went into the cities, built up the cities. One of those cities I was in China, Shenzhen, 30 years ago was basically a fishing village. Today, there, I believe, are 15 million people that live there in 30 years. And what happened both in Brazil and in China was that people left nature and came into the cities, and they, for quite a while, associated nature with poverty. They didn't want to have anything to do with nature, a lot of them. But enough time has gone by that voice in them says you need it. You need nature. You need this for your kids. And so in both places, there are these big campaigns emerging. And people that I met in both countries are here today. It's astonishing. In China, I spoke to a burgeoning industry of nature educators. These are mainly people in their 20s and 30s, just the happiest faces on earth out there. I couldn't believe it. This is growing, and one of the folks I met there is here today, and he just came up to me and says, it's growing really fast, the movement in China. So I meet them. I meet the Australians who are here, who I think it's 4 out of 7 states, if I got that right, that now have campaigns to get kids outdoors, the whole states. I meet people like Gil Penalosa, who inspired us with the opening plenary about all of the good news around the world, all of the amazing examples of a good future that are here and there. And you saw this in his slides, you heard it in his voice, his enthusiasm. We were just talking in the hall a little while ago about the fact that we need to put together somehow in books, in videos, illustrations, photographs with people in them of places that exist right now in Western Europe, in Australia, in China, in the United States, in South America, of great nature-rich neighborhoods, nature-rich cities, wonderful places, the future that we could be headed toward if we choose to go there, so that we can see it instead of this post-apocalyptic. I've been talking about that for years now, this image of the future that our culture seems to hold in its head, or many of our cultures do. And Gil is out there creating that. I meet people like, my good friends, the Canadians here. One of them is not here, is Bob Peart. Bob brought me up to Canada for the first time. I think it was 2006. And the story he tells is that he was visiting San Diego on vacation with his wife. He's a really well-known conservationist in British Columbia. And he was on vacation, and he saw my book at the Natural History Museum in a stack, and the title really ticked him off. Nature Deficit Disorder. And so he and his wife go off, and then pretty soon Bob turns around and comes back and buys the damn thing. And that's what his wife called it. And then she said I ruined her vacation, because for the next week all he did was read that damn book. And then he called me. He tracked me down, and I came up. He brought conservationists and environmental educators and policymakers from all over British Columbia. And this was, again, there's a lot I don't know. I didn't know that there was this much nature deficit disorder all over the world, including places like British Columbia with all the nature and beauty that you have. And at dinner, it was a great conference, and at dinner, he got up and spoke, and this was at the Lieutenant Governor's mansion or house. And he got up and spoke, tall, stiff upper lip Canadian. And he said, he looks like a Mountie, I'll put it that way. And he said that, he looked over at me and he said, "Rich, you don't know why you're here." And that confused me. I thought I did. You invited me to come speak. And he said, "No, you really don't." And he told the story that I just told you. But then he said, "The reason you're really here is that one of my best friends was a wildlife biologist like Bob. Bob's a wildlife biologist. And he said, wildlife biologists live with a sense of loss and grief every day. That's their job. because of endangered and threatened species. And many of them get burned out, many of them get depressed. And Bob's good friend had committed suicide. And so the tall, Mountie-looking Canadian began to cry when he said that. That's the impact that the work that you do does. He then said something I thought was really interesting. And later he wrote blog pieces for us. He said he was about to get out of the business of conservation and wildlife biology because it was getting to him, that sense of grief and loss. And then his friend died. And he said, then I got involved with the Children in Nature movement. And he said, I don't know why. It's not rational, but it gives me hope. I've heard that again and again from people, from conservationists. So part of what you are about is the conservation of conservationists. They get involved with this, of connecting with kids and giving them that gift of nature that they were given when they were kids, that led them to love nature. And they come back. Bob Peart did not get out of the business. He became the head of the Sierra Club in British Columbia. In any case, I meet those people, and I'm honored to meet them and humbled by the work that you do, and I bet you meet these people too. We have that in common among many other things. And your job, like mine, is to be inspired by them. So I want to tell you, briefly, I want to tell you a couple stories about what I'm working on now, which, again, I'm telling you about. I talked about this a little bit last year, but I'm working on a new book that my editor believes is an urban myth because it's so late. And I call it my alleged new book. I call every book my alleged new book. And this one is about the human relationship with other animals, both pets and companion animals and wild animals. And as I've worked on this, I've learned something about the essence of what all of us are doing, I think. Let me tell you a couple stories. One is a personal story. I was on a lake in San Diego in my boat. I was fishing. I have a little tiny boat, and I was out there. And I saw what I thought were two vultures on the shore. And I eased up close to them. I have an electric motor. I had the whole lake to myself. It's way out in the backcountry. And I eased up, and they were not vultures. They were two golden eagles, really big golden eagles. I got within 20 feet of them. You don't get within 20 feet of golden eagles. And I went back and forth in my boat, watching them. And they were watching me. One of them flew up around a mountain peak and then came back. They were eating a fish there. And they would do this. They would lean down to take a bite, and then they would look like this at me. And they would do this. We did that a lot for a long time. It seemed like forever. It was probably, 10 minutes, but it seemed like 10 hours. And in there, something happened there. I went home and told Matthew, my younger son, the one I've often said I knew he had the fishing gene because when he was 3, I caught him fishing in the humidifier. I told Matthew, whoever I say I am not. Whoever I was in those moments with those eagles is who I really am. And I don't have the words to explain that. I told that story, by the way, at a big meeting of wildlife biologists in Canada about 2 years ago, I think. And now wildlife biologists, you don't want to anthropomorphize, you don't want to be romantic about animals and all that. I can't tell you how many heads I saw nodding They'd had that experience too. Something happened there. The great Jewish thinker Martin Buber has a famous essay called I and You, I and Thou. And basically what he says, and this isn't distinct only to Martin Buber, but he said that you and I don't really exist. What exists is between us. It's relationship. That without that relationship, we don't exist. I've never heard that idea expressed about humans and other animals, but that's what it was. Pat Hasbach, the wonderful eco-environmentalist who is here, has a phrase for this she just told me that she learned from a patient, actually. That place is the place where the life forces meet. Martin Buber said it's a kind of electricity that some people call God between I and thou. And without that, we don't exist. Second story. I love telling this one because I love watching the body language in the audience. This was told to me by a guy named Paul Dayton, who is one of the most famous oceanographers in the world, an expert on plankton in the Antarctic. He's at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and he and I have become friends over time. He tells a story. He's down on the bottom of the ocean with his scuba gear, and he's poking around for samples of something, and he feels a presence come above him. And he looks up. You know, it's never a good sign when you feel that. And he looks up, and he said it was a really big octopus, one of those ones with like a 12-foot span. And as Paul puts it, the octopus thought I was a clam and came down and grabbed him and wrapped him up like this. And he said, you know, people think those tentacles are soft and spongy. No, they're not. They're hard, and he couldn't budge them. And one of the things that's interesting about the tentacles of the arms of an octopus is, in a sense, they are independent brains. That there are these parts of the octopus that kind of think independently, but they collaborate. And this and the suckers have incredible senses. And so, in a sense, he was being held in the octopus's brain, very tight. And around that moment, he realized he was almost out of oxygen. And he took the last breath and took the last bit of strength he had. He couldn't move. This thing was huge. And he kicked off the bottom. And he started going up through the column of water with the octopus wrapped around him. They both started going up together. And he said he could feel the octopus's beak, sharp beak, which is behind it is a poison sac, right there, on his neck, moving around his neck until the octopus was right there, and he was looking into the octopus's eye. And he said, something happened there that I really can't explain. We made a non-aggression pact. And he said the octopus loosened a little bit, and they're still going up in the water. And then let go and step and, move back. He said it turned into kind of the shape of a space shuttle, and then vroom, disappeared or went down into the dark. Right then, Paul hit the surface of the water, pulled off his mask, gasping for air. Now, the next part is what's amazing. What does Paul do? He puts the mask right back on, and he swims down after the octopus. And he sees it down there disappearing. And he said it was like, he says it was a spiritual experience. He's not ashamed to say that. It was something happened there that he doesn't have the words to explain. Such awe and wonder he felt. Third story, and this was about a dog. I mean, I think that, as John Young says, that pets are a bridge to the wild, particularly for children. And Lisa Donahue, Lisa is right there. Lisa told me this story. She lives in Toronto, soon to move to Houston. Sorry about that. And not that, I like Houston. I've written about Houston. So she told me about, they had a big dog named Jack. And one day she walks into a room, and Jack is laying on the floor, on the carpet, and her son is lying right next to Jack with his arm around Jack. They're lying there, just very quiet. And she hears her son say, "I don't have a heart anymore." And she rushes in, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And he said, "My heart is in Jack. My heart is in Jack." That's that permeability. I just love that story. In the book, and please don't tell anybody this phrase, okay? Don't use it. I shouldn't even do. In the book, I call that place that I described, that Martin Buber described, I call that the habitat of the heart. I believe there are two habitats. The physical habitat that we're all trying to protect. And then there's this other habitat, the habitat of the heart. Both are endangered. If one goes, the other goes. So much of your work is about nurturing kids and their families to feel that, to be in that place between them and the golden eagles, or between them and their dog, or between them and an octopus. And to have that feeling and to fully know that feeling and to know that they are not alone on the earth. One of the most interesting studies that I've seen says that the urban parks with the highest benefit for human psychological health are the urban parks with the highest biodiversity. That is no accident that it's good for us. Much of our pathologies as a species, I think, have to do with we think we can go it alone. We need other species in ways that we don't understand, in ways that are beyond our language to describe. We have to have them, and they have to have us. To the degree that we can figure out how to have symbiosis with other species, what Glenn Albrecht in Australia calls the solacene. Thomas Berry talked about the ecocene as opposed to the I always mispronounce it, scene, which is people are in charge. The ecocene is similar to Glenn Albrecht's symbiocene. I like his phrase better. It's in symbiosis. We are living together. We are not alone. I think that is extraordinarily important. I want to mention one study that is going to come out in just a few days. They gave me permission to tell you about it, and I won't go through it because I'm running short on time. It's a study that repeated some of the research that Stephen Kellert, who passed away this year, one of the greats in this business, did years ago. And they interviewed thousands of Americans. It's called The Nature of American Studies. And if you go to natureofamericans.org in a few days, you'll see it. It has some really amazing information in there. One of the most amazing conclusions, not so much amazing but helpful, is that they have found that experiencing nature is a very social experience. that we need to recognize that this is a social thing. When people do, we usually think about this in solitude, but this is a social experience. So our family nature clubs, all of that can learn from that. As I said, and I'll wrap it up here, that our greatest barrier, I think, is despair. And I've said that often. I call that the dystopic trance. The number one young adult literature genre for years has been called dystopic fiction. It's about a post-apocalyptic world in which not even vampires are having a good time. and that we live in that trance and we have to wake up from it. And that's going to be particularly hard now. But we have to do that. We have to have a vision of a great future. And Martin Luther King, as I've said often, demonstrated that any movement, any culture will fail if it cannot paint a picture of a world that people will want to go to. We have to paint that picture. A lot of people feel right now, they're not feeling a lot of hope, a lot of people. We cannot give in to that. I wrote a piece recently, I'll just end with this, it's a few paragraphs, trying to imagine what we can do now, what we will do now, what you will do, what you are already doing. During the past decade, thousands of individuals and organizations have worked to reconnect children to the natural world. This represents one of the few concerns in America, and I would argue in the world, that brings people together across partisan and religious lines and across national borders, even through walls. And this makes sense because a butterfly migration or jaguars coming north or wolves moving south do not see borders. We must continue to support the birthright of all children, every child, to a healthy environment and to a connection to the natural world, no matter what kind of neighborhood they come from, and to teach the responsibilities that come with that right. We can work together to reduce climate disruption and the collapse of biodiversity by opposing policies that destroy people and the rest of nature. We have to oppose those new policies. And by making the case that human beings protect what they love and love only what they know, more than ever, building a future generation of conservationists will depend on helping children and adults fall in love with the natural world, to enter that space, that habitat of the heart. We can emphasize the healing powers of the natural world for mental and physical health, for the capacity to learn and create, and for reducing violence. We can promote family nature clubs and similar social approaches as ways to seek meaning and solace in a difficult and alienating time. We can offer a little vitamin N for the soul through places of worship, and we can encourage pediatricians, psychologists, and other healthcare professionals to prescribe nature. We can pursue natural cultural capacity, as I've called it, illuminating the wealth of ways that different cultures, different peoples connect to nature. We can reach out to people in the food movement, to community organizing groups in urban and rural neighborhoods, to military families and immigrant organizations, and to homeless children, and to children with disabilities. We have a long way to go in those areas. We can create and renew nature-rich cities to serve as incubators of biodiversity and habitats of health. Local institutions such as libraries, zoos, aquaria, and nature centers can become centers of bioregional awareness and nature connection for children and families. We can help build a new generation of nature-based schools, increase the number and quality of natural schoolyards, and redouble our efforts to honor natural teachers as individual agents of change. With the support of education and business, we can nurture the development of careers that connect people to nature, new jobs irreplaceable by technology. And as the human species continues to urbanize, we can strengthen our international efforts. We can seek solidarity in a movement that will grow regardless of national politics. Worldwide, we can tell a new story of a nature-rich future to counter the post-apocalyptic vision of the future that is so widely accepted. This is the challenge, the happy cause. This is a happy cause of all the people I meet, of you and the people you meet in this movement. A movement, like a book, is never finished, but it can be adopted, in this case by millions more in generations to come. One of the people I met, by the way, was a little girl in a line where I was signing books. She was 11 years old. I meant to mention her. And she leaned forward very quietly, and she said she didn't have a book for me to sign, but she wanted to ask me a question. And the question was, what does it feel like to finish a book? And I said, I'm signing. And I said, well, you know, and I say this all the time, books are never finished, only abandoned. And she listened to that. And I said, what I mean by that is that they're never good enough. I'll pull down books that I wrote, and invariably I'll turn to a terrible paragraph. And I say, oh, I should have done that differently. Books are never finished, they're only abandoned. You really have to walk away and say it's finished, it's in somebody else's hands. And they're abandoned. So then she leaves, and I said, oh, God, I've discouraged her. Oh, no. And I get a text from her mother just a little while later, I guess from the car. And her mother said that her 11-year-old daughter, wanted to tell me something. She wanted to tell me that I didn't get the whole picture. That yes, books can be abandoned, but then books can be adopted. A book is never perfect, it's never done. A movement will never be perfect, and it will never be done. We may not reach every child, every family, every community, but everyone you meet, everyone you touch, everyone you help to touch nature and be touched by it, every one of them counts. And some of these people you meet would never have touched nature if you had not given them that gift. Here's what we cannot do. We cannot heal every hurt or prevent every tragedy. But surely, in the words of the Greek poet, we can do what we can in the limited lifetime we have to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Thank you.